We're back here for Fantasy Fest 2024. We are joined by Chris Raybon from Action Network. Raybon, we have been talking a lot of positive segments today, bounce back players, rankings and tiers, and I apologize that we're bringing you on for more of the negative discussion, overvalued draft picks to avoid, but I appreciate you making the time.
Oh, I love the negative discussion. This is puff piece season in full effect. Everyone's writing up sleepers and all the beat writers are all positive. So I think it helps people to kind of hear the other side of and some of the downsides of these players, because everyone has a range of outcomes. And I think we tend to focus on ceiling a little bit more. And we should, and there's a reason to do that in fantasy. You're trying, especially with your mid to late round picks. But I do think there are some guys where the floor is not being priced in correctly.
D-Bro, are you excited to also come in and bring the hammer down on some of these guys?
Of course. I mean, I love to sit here and spread the hate and the shade just as much as I love to spread the love.
Well, let's start with one of your players here, D-Bro. Josh Jacobs was somebody that you've been bringing the hate on really all off season long. Part of that is your love for Marshawn Lloyd. Part of that is your hate for Josh Jacobs. RB13 in ECR, RB11 in ADP. Why are you avoiding Josh Jacobs?
I just worry about Jacobs being a player that this high volume season ruined him. We've seen that from running backs in previous seasons, and I'm not going to rule it out with Jacobs. And everybody wants to, I know everybody's automatically going to think like, well, Marshawn Lloyd's dealing with the hamstring issue and AJ Dillon's not good. Okay. Does everybody not realize that Josh Jacobs has already been dealing with multiple injuries in camp? He's not right now. Doesn't mean that he wasn't earlier in camp and they couldn't crop back up. And it's not like Jacobs was an efficient player at all last year. Like, you were talking about a running back that was outside the top 35 running backs in missed tackles forced per attempt and yards after contact per attempt. And he wasn't even this good last year. And I get, like, he's going to a better offense. That's great. But if he can't stay healthy and he can't break tackles, what are you betting on? It's just touchdowns? That's about it? Like, so no, I cannot invest in Josh Jacobs as an RB1, which right now I'm looking at consensus. He is in ECR, he is the RB12. No way.
So, Raybon, you have Marshawn Lloyd listed as one of the names you're avoiding, obviously at a much lower cost down at RB49. Is that because you are in on Josh Jacobs, or are you kind of avoiding the backfield entirely?
Ooh.
I think Lloyd, and so everyone wants to kind of target these rookies, and a lot of it is based on talent, right? Because there's another guy I have that's I think is overdrafted based on talent. Love Lloyd's talent, but he's got behind the 8 ball in camp. They re-signed AJ Dillon, and this reminds me a whole lot of a few years ago when they drafted AJ Dillon, and everyone was excited. And Jamal Williams was the RB2 on that team, and everyone was like, "Well, Jamal Williams is toast. Forget about him. He doesn't bring anything to the table that Dillon can't." And Dillon essentially redshirted that first year. And from what I'm hearing from LaFleur, just the way he's talking about Lloyd, it kind of sounds like that's going to be the case again. So I just think there are still other rookies, maybe not quite as talented, but in much better situations that you can take in that range, such as Ray Davis, such as Braylon Allen, guys who I think have a better shot at seeing volume, because I still think this is a 3-person backfield. I don't think they re-signed AJ Dillon just for him to, be a healthy scratch on game day or get no carries, because he's not like a special teams guy or anything. So I think he's going to be active, and I think he's going to get carries, and I don't think you can put Lloyd in pass protection too much either. So I just think there's better alternatives.
D-Bro, you're such a fan of Lloyd, at least you were, as a prospect during the draft process. Are you worried about kind of the Matt LaFleur of it all, and he doesn't like to have kind of that one workhorse running back, and there are mouths to feed? Your mileage may vary on what you expect out of AJ Dillon this year, but he is still around. So does that give you some cause for concern with a guy like Lloyd?
It doesn't. I mean, we've seen LaFleur use multiple backs over multiple years, and so I think that he has a role in this offense. Now, health and availability, they're concerns. I'm not going to shy away from that. So Lloyd does have to get the health right, and dealing with hamstring issues out the gate can be problematic. I mean, that's fine. Like, I totally understand the risk, but I do think he's going to slip some in drafts. And again, Raybon talked about being a fan of the talent. I think if you're drafting off of talent, which I want to do. I mean, yeah, Lloyd was my RB1 of this class. I love his talent. We want to invest in this offense. So I'm still in on Lloyd, but I do think that the injury concerns do need to be brought up here.
Raybon, let's kind of stick with the rookies because another name on your list is Jonathon Brooks. He's up at RB32. We'll get to some of the higher ranked guys soon, but since we're talking about the rookies anyway, I mean, Debro just said Lloyd was his RB1. For most people, RB1 in the class was Jonathon Brooks. Obviously, you can kind of very easily paint a picture of the opportunity in Carolina once he is healthy. Is the injury effect the reason that you're avoiding him, or is there something else?
Yeah, the injury effect is obviously why I'm avoiding him, because I think the thing with talent and what people don't get is that missing all this time in camp, like that's big for the coaches, right? And if there was no clear alternative in Carolina, like if Brooks was going into a backfield with only Raheem Blackshear or something like that, it would be completely different. But Chuba Hubbard played well last year. Miles Sanders is making a lot of money, a lot more money than he should, but he's still there. Blackshear probably makes the roster as a return man / third running back. So there's no real incentive to rush this guy. And it's not like the Panthers are the Green Bay Packers even, or a team that's competing for anything in particular. I mean, this is the team expected to be one of the worst teams in the league. I am bullish on them, but it's not like they have any incentive to rush Brooks back. So even when he comes back, it's not like you can just pencil him in. Like, let's say you have him missing the first 4 games and maybe another 1 or 2, just because that's kind of the nature of the position. You're looking at like 10, 11 game projection, but it's not like you're just penciling him in for starter carries for all of those other games. Like there's going to be a easing in period. This is not a team that's expected to be in a ton of positive game scripts. They have other options to play on passing downs. So I just feel like he's kind of pigeonholed into a certain role, and you're just relying completely on talent on a bad team with multiple other options and no guarantees. So I think this it just might be a guy who, I think he underperformed his ADP this year, and then you buy low heading into next year.
Debro, when you think about Brooks, obviously like where he's going, it's not like you're spending a ton, but it is like in RB3 territory. Is that somebody that you're taking in that range, or are you just looking elsewhere?
Yeah, I mean, we talked about him earlier on the show, and I'm taking him. I'm not dismissing any of the concerns that Raybon brought up. I look at Brooks as they're taking the conservative approach and holding him out right now. I think that is the right approach instead of starting him too aggressively. So I still look at where he goes in drafts, and I'm willing to take the swing, because if you were to tell me he was RB24, a top 24 guy, then I would be more apprehensive about it. But in the RB3 land, we're taking swings on like committee backfields. We're taking our shots and picking, our favorite flavor of running back that we believe at that point. And to me, I think that's an appropriate price for a player that if he does come back after that first 4 weeks, and really you're drafting him at that point, because at the stretch run, could he have that 15, 17 touch upside? Not to open the season, but that's not what you're drafting him for. You're not drafting him as a top 24 guy that's going to have to be inserted in your lineup immediately. It's a flex guy or a flyer basically at the RB3 spot, where could he be an RB2 down the stretch? Could he be a guy that is not leaving your starting lineup? I think that's still firmly in place or possible for him, so I'm still taking the swing.
Raybon, do you see him as somebody that you would maybe trade for partway through the season, and just you're avoiding in drafts, but might want to add like as he's getting healthier, or you're just kind of avoiding in general?
I could see it, but it would have to, I think it would probably be too obvious at that point, and the person trading wouldn't want to trade him with me. But the way I see it is this: I feel like we tend to underestimate the fallibility of our own projection. So, like, for example, a guy like Nick Chubb, I could get behind a lot more, even though I'm below market on him too. I generally think the market overrates guys that are entering the season hurt or going to miss games or suspended, whatever not. But I could get behind Chubb because we know who Chubb is and we know who they want Chubb to be, and he's been that. Whereas Brooks, it's like this guy is a new coaching staff, there's new everything. Like this guy could come in, and let's say Hubbard's playing well. I mean, Brooks could be a guy who's getting like 8 carries a game, and that's just what his role. Like, we don't have he could get 17, but why? In that case, it's like, I might as well. I look at upside, not just as talent, but as how many games of startability can I get? So it's like, I see other guys in that range, whether at running back or other positions, that I can get 17 weeks of upside versus maybe maybe 8 to 10 if I'm lucky. So that's kind of how I'm looking at it with Brooks. Like, again, love the talent, but I just think he's entering a little bit of a muddy situation. It's not necessarily a great offense to be entering. So there's different situations. Maybe he was on different teams, a different team in a different spot in a different year. I would be more bullish, but Carolina is just not jumping out at me. It's like, oh man, I got to invest in their hurt running back.
Debro, another running back that you're avoiding is DeAndre Swift, RB25, ADP, a little bit higher than that, RB21. One of the first names, if not the first name, to announce that he was signing in free agency this year. So the Bears wanted him. They went out and got him, apparently. Why are you avoiding him this year?
I can't draft him as an RB2. I think it's twofold. One, we saw what the Chicago Bears did with the running back rotation last year, and it was a total freaking mess. I'm not ruling that out as being like not maybe to that degree, but also still a mess this year. And I'm just off of DeAndre Swift the talent. Like, you take the 2 monster games that he had at the beginning of the season away, and I don't usually like to do that, but if you look, I mean, that is a large sample size we have after these 2 just ridiculous games. After that, he was the RB25 in fantasy points per game in what we think, like with the Eagles, arguably a better offense. And I'm not saying that Chicago's going to be a bad offense this year, but rookie quarterback, we're still making projections there. And with DeAndre Swift, he was outside the top 25 guys in missed tackles forced per attempt, yards after contact per attempt. Like, I'm just not investing. Like, if anything, I think DeAndre Swift could be this year's Miles Sanders. I think per talent, like, I think Khalil Herbert is a better running back than DeAndre Swift rushing the ball.
Raybon, where are you at on Swift this year?
Honestly, I think he's ranked about right. Like, when I thought I was going to be fading him, and then when I kind of go through the backs, I still feel better about him than some of the other guys after him. But I do take that point. The only thing I will say is it is a new regime again, because now you have Shane Waldron coming in at offensive coordinator, and you have so they went out and they felt the need to get Swift, and it looks like, at least to me, I could be wrong in this, but reading between the tea leaves, it seems like Khalil Herbert is the one that's kind of like lost favor a little bit with this new regime, because Rashawn Johnson's been playing over him, and Herbert, I think, was the guy playing into that second preseason game. So it's kind of a head scratcher, but I think Swift will be fine. I don't think he's like, oh, you got to run out and draft him, but I'm not like hard fading him either. I'm fine if I get him there, but I'm usually not really drafting running back that at that point in the draft. I am usually waiting until I start getting down and seeing who falls to me, in that 30 to 35, 37 range. So I'm kind of going like a hero running back strategy and not really drafting too many of those guys. But I don't hate if I get Swift, but I'm not excited about it either.
So you mentioned kind of the hero RB strategy. One name that some people are using for that strategy is Kyren Williams, but Raybon, that's somebody you're avoiding also.
For me, it's just last year was the time to get Kyren Williams. Like, this year, the running backs I feel good about are obviously McCaffrey, Breece Hall, Bijan Robinson, and Jonathan Taylor. Saquon Barkley, you could make a great case for him. He's getting a little older, new situation. Guys on new teams tend to not produce as well, but whatever. The issue with Kyren Williams is Sean McVay is very predictable. We know how to read between the tea leaves with him. He rested Kyren Williams all preseason with the rest of the starters. He also rested Blake Corum, a rookie who has never played an NFL snap in his life. And yet this guy is resting, already being treated as a starter. Kyren Williams, through 2 years, never played more than 12 games. Last year, the most touches he had since high school. He never had that many touches in college as he had last year. I just think that the Rams know how valuable he is, and they want to kind of cut the workload a little. And so is he going to be a complete bust and finish like outside the top 24? I don't think so, but I just don't think you want to be paying a running back 7 price for a guy who I think is more likely to have a floor year than a ceiling year. Like, I don't think he's likely to beat out a Taylor or a Breece or guys like that again this year. I think it's more likely that his workload comes down a little bit. There's some regression, and that he's still is still one of the, I think, least durable backs just because of his size and whatnot. So I just think RB7 is not where you want to be. Like, I think there's a big drop off from even a guy like a Jahmyr Gibbs or a Saquon to a Kyren Williams. I'd rather have a guy like Travis Etienne, who I'm more confident will have a heavier workload and play more snaps for the entirety of the year.
I totally agree. I find that Kyren Williams is one of the more interesting and somewhat difficult players for me to rank this year, but there's always someone in the drafts I'm in who likes him more than me. Like, I'm just getting very little because I don't think the cost is one that I want to pay. And there's other names that I like in that area. There's other running backs I'd prefer, either earlier or a little later than him. So I'm just not getting a lot of Kyren, even though like if you had him last year, like when he was healthy, was there a more fun player to have on your roster than Kyren Williams? No, but I just think it's very different, going into this year. And, we are playing for 2024, not for 2023. And it's important to remember that, Debro, Kyren Williams, are you, for him where he's going, or are you fading?
I'm a little bit below consensus, so I will get exposure to him. I don't have him at RB7. I got him at RB9. Like, I've got Mixon, and depending on what his hamstring stuff, like maybe I bump him behind Kyren. But I got Derrick Henry over him too. So I will get exposure to Kyren. And like the way that I see that backfield this year is I think Corum was brought in so we don't see the Kyren 22, 25 touches per game. I think Corum was brought in to take some of that workload away, like 8 to 10 touches per game, predominantly in the early downs, probably when they're leading in positive game scripts if they get there. But I think when the games are close, I still think Kyren is the better passing down back. I think he's still going to be the clear lead, like probably 65, 70% of the snaps. So it really comes down to health for him. But I think that's another reason why they brought him in. So his touch counts stay reasonable for his size and try to keep him healthy instead of saying, okay, here's 25 touches, although we probably don't see you for another 2 or 3 weeks after this game. There you go. I think that's why they brought Corum in, though.
And even though Kyren is not, like, he profiles as a guy who should catch a lot of passes, he really didn't catch a lot of passes, even with that heavy role last year. So that's another thing. Like, we're all playing in at least half PPR these days. It's like, if I'm going to take our RB7, like who doesn't catch passes, like it better be Derrick Henry, who's going to get like 200, like 300 carries if he stays healthy all 16, 17 games. So
that's a good point, Raybon, especially because Stafford, like, he's YOLO, man. Like, it's not like he's never had like a super, super high check down rate. So it's like, even though he's a pocket passer, like if it's like, well, I could check it down, or I could just go 30 yards down the field. He's going 30 yards down the field.
Absolutely.
You are spot on too, that like we're basically all playing half PPR now. I had somebody the other day, just a friend of mine, ask me for some draft advice, and I asked the scoring setting, and he was like, "Oh, it's standard. There's no PPR." And like, not to knock people who play that way, but I did a double take. I was like, I can't remember the last time somebody asked me a question for an actual standard league. It's just become so prevalent to go the other way. Another player, Raybon, that you wanted to avoid, who is kind of based on volume last year with his success, was Rachaad White. Are you kind of projecting just less volume this year? Do you have problems with the player? Why are you avoiding White?
Love this call.
I think it's just a combination of all those things. So, number one, I think that whole offense could take a step back. Canales, his impact might be underrated. I mean, Seattle, Geno has a career year a couple years ago under his watch, and then he goes to Tampa Bay. All of a sudden, Baker Mayfield has a career year. So now I think that offense takes a step back. The interior of the line is the worst. Is the worst part of the line for the Bucs. I mean, it could be really bad. They're starting a rookie at center, and their guards are pretty bad. So. It's not like he's getting any help. And then I think the player is average. I think I didn't like the fact that down the stretch, they did try to, alleviate some of his workload, especially in the passing game. You still have Edmonds, Bucky Irving. I think anytime, another thing to kind of watch is similar with Kyren, right? When you have and I get that why you were fading Jacobs earlier, which makes sense. Anytime you have a talented rookie, even if you're not high on that rookie, and I am high on Irving, but even if you're not, like, it is something to monitor and kind of be aware of. So like Rachaad White, last year it was him, it was Chase Edmonds, who we know what Chase Edmonds is, and it was Tucker, who didn't pan out really. But this year you have Bucky Irving, who I think can add a dimension to that offense. So I think the role is a little bit in danger. I don't think the player is anything special. I don't like the offensive line. I think the offense is going to be lower scoring, which cuts into the touchdown equity. And it just seems like last year was the year to own Rachaad White. Last year was the year to own Kyren Williams. I know last year is still going to correlate the most to this year, but it's nowhere near 100% correlation. And that's kind of our job, is to find these guys that are going to regress and not perform as well. And I think Rachaad White is a prime candidate to be more of like a middling RB2. I think that we expected him to be last year. rather than this like high end RB2 borderline RB1.
Debro, you were nodding and saying that you totally agreed with this call.
I love everything Raybon just said right now. I love every bit of it. Rachaad White burned me last year because I have a hard time investing in guys like where it's just like, okay, if he gets all the volume, then it's a volume play and then he outpaces everything. Like I have a hard time investing in guys that like I don't think are supremely talented players. Like if you look at every efficiency metric basically out there, okay, he was good in the passing game, but from a tackle breaking perspective, he was nothing special. And if you also go and listen to Todd Bowles talk, he's talked about when he's mentioned Bucky Irving and he's talked about the backfield. He's also thrown a little bit of side shade at Rachaad White, being like, well, we got a lot of big plays out of the run game last year, blah, blah, blah. And yes, to Raybon's point, that offensive line, they added some parts and pieces. It's still probably going to be a bottom 5 to 10 offensive line. So if he can't break tackles on his own, I don't think the offensive line this year is doing him a ton of favors. I'm absolutely with this. Like I've got Rachaad White at RB16. And I could make you a case where I could bump him a little bit lower too.
Quick reminder for everybody to join our Fantasy Pros Discord community, chat with other fans, and get access to exclusive AMAs that wind up on our podcast feed. You can join the fun with Joe, Welsh, and Boggs Mondays at 2 Eastern, Fitz and Boggs Tuesdays at 5 Eastern, and Welsh and Erickson Thursdays at 3 Eastern. Come get your questions answered and be on the show at fantasypros.com/chat. All right, guys, let's talk about a couple wide receivers that we're avoiding as well. And Debra, I want to start with Davante Adams, somebody you highlighted. ADP is several spots higher than where we're ranking him. Why are you avoiding a guy who's been really good for a long time?
This really comes down to the old adage of don't hate the player, hate the ADP. I don't understand how we can rank him as a wide receiver 1 when nothing has been like, what's better about this Raiders offense? What's better about it? Like, quarterback play, we don't think is going to be amazing. Gardner Minshew was not good last year. Aiden O'Connell, still not great. So whoever is the starting quarterback, I know Minshew's getting the nod right now. I don't really care. I don't think either one of them are very good. Davante Adams is being drafted as a wide receiver 1, and he didn't even finish as that last year. He was a wide receiver 15 in fantasy points per game. And this is like, he was top 3 in every volume metric you can find. So it's like, okay, quarterback play didn't get any better. Volume's not going to be any better because you can't get any more volume than basically he got last year. They probably run a little bit of a slower offense this year with Luke Getsy out there. So how are we ranking him as a wide receiver 1? That's what I don't get. Like, you were to tell me he was a wide receiver 2 in ranks? Sure, fine. Let's draft Davante Adams. Wide receiver 1 price tag? No, can't see it. No.
Raybon, what are you doing with Davante?
Honestly, I go back and forth, but like, so here's my thing at receiver. Everyone after like AJ Brown, so like starting from like wide receiver 8 to like wide receiver 24, 25, like after you get to like T. Higgins, DJ Moore, that area, I have them separated by like 1 point per game. So I don't really care who I get in that range. I'm not overpaying to get Davante Adams, so I'm not getting a ton of him. I don't hate him at that price because I think these are all kind of floor guys, and some of them are going to hit ceilings. I don't think that he's in a great offense. And so, but at the same time, it's like, what are my alternatives? It's like, if it's Debo, maybe if Ayuk goes, it's Harrison Jr., who's never played a snap. It's Olave, who hates his quarterback. It's Garrett Wilson, who is on a team with a good defense. It's Drake London, who we're kind of projecting for a lot more routes because the offense is going to be all 1-1. But, you know, like they're all the same to me. Like, I'm not fading him per se, but I agree that like you shouldn't be reaching for Davante Adams as like this like bona fide wide receiver 1 because 175 targets last year and he still couldn't finish as one. So it might just be about that time.
Debra, another receiver that you're avoiding, Hollywood Brown, now on the Chiefs, wide receiver 41, ADP, is ECR's wide receiver 42, so about that range for both of them. Obviously, got the injury concerns already here, stemming from the injury from that week 1 of the preseason. They needed receiver help compared to last year. They added Xavier Worthy. Obviously, there's some question marks about Rashee Rice, maybe. Now Hollywood Brown somewhat injured, so it's not the easiest receiving room to kind of parse through when you're trying to do ranks. But Hollywood Brown, I mean, if he is healthy, you can kind of paint the picture of, oh, the speed, what a great fit with Mahomes, the same way we're doing with Xavier Worthy. I kind of get why you're avoiding him, though. Can you touch on that?
I don't trust him to stay healthy. And I was making this case even before he already got injured. So Raybon's talking about, like, you know, kind of fading guys that are already injured before we start the season. I mean, Hollywood Brown, like, when has he stayed? Like, he's barely stayed healthy throughout his entire career. He came into the NFL dealing with foot problems. So, like, you add all of that on top of a player that, even if you look at just the profile, his yards per route run has dropped in each of the last 4 seasons. Amongst 81 qualifying wide receivers last year, he was 62nd in yards per route run and 48th in first downs per route run. So it's like, outside of it being, oh, the Kansas City Chief effect and Patrick Mahomes and stuff like that, what in his profile says, yes, I must draft him? I don't get that. So I'm just going to keep avoiding him. I'll draft Worthy. I'll take the shot on Rachaad Rice or Kelsey or whatever. I love all other parts and pieces of this offense, not named Hollywood Brown.
Raybon, are you avoiding Brown as well, particularly given what you mentioned about the injuries earlier?
Yeah, it's like it's like him and Worthy are pretty much even in my ranks. So Worthy still usually has a lower ADP, not always, but usually. So I still rather have Worthy. I mean, I agree. I think you have to factor in, and not just the durability, but when it makes sense with the body type too, because it's like Brown is a smaller guy, and also, you know, most of the places he's kind of been in a position to be like a number 1 or number 2 target, whereas here, Kelsey, Rice, Worthy, I mean, you could conceivably be number 4 in targets per route run on this team, even if you are like an 85-90% snap player. So that I think there's more downside, and I just don't know about the upside with Rice looking like he's probably not going to miss a substantial amount of games as first feared.
Yeah, I mean, injuries will find you, right? So why intentionally start off with them? We're going to get going soon. I do want to quickly wrap up with, you guys both suggested players to avoid on the Packers. So I want to kind of have you each make the case for either side. D-Row, you want to avoid Jayden Reed this year. Raybon, you want to avoid Christian Watson. I don't know if you heard at the end of the last segment, we were kind of building up Christian Watson. So it's nice to have you come in and pour some cold water on that. So let's start with why you're avoiding Watson.
Listen, the guy's talented, and so are about 7 other skill players on the Green Bay Packers. And Christian Watson is the one of those guys who has, it's like Kyren Williams all over again. It's like, this guy, he's been 2 years in the league and he hasn't played a full season yet. He got hurt the other day in camp, just like going up for a pass, and he like missed the preseason game or something. Like everything, this guy just can't stay healthy. And now, the last thing you wanted to see in the preseason was Dontavian Wicks catching a long touchdown, because that, again, when there's uncertainty, it's like Christian Watson is still being drafted as like, okay, right, as like a fringe, like, okay, he's not a bona fide like starting wide receiver, but he's one of the first guys you're taking as like an upside guy. You know, that probably sits on your bench to start the year. And so I get that there's not a ton of risk, but I just see a lot better guys at cheaper ADPs. I don't trust him to stay healthy. I don't trust him to be, even when he is healthy, an 85-90% snap player like some of the other guys I can get in this range, because you have a guy like Jayden Reed, who I think I know where you're going to go with this, because, you know, his snap count is in flux. But realistically, Reed, Dobbs, Wicks, and Watson are all so good that they all may run on average 65 to 75% of the routes. And that is like, that's just caps their upside. And then that wouldn't be as much of an issue if you didn't also have 2 tight ends that, I mean, I don't know if like what the health status of Kraft is, but eventually you figure there would be 2 tight ends in the mix. And you also got, running backs that you want to get in the route in Lloyd if he ever gets healthy. So there's just only so many routes to go around. And touchdowns are the most fickle stat. Like, touchdowns are like, yeah, he started his career catching a touchdown on, over 10% of his catches. And we've seen Cortland Sutton do this, like 2 touchdowns, 10 touchdowns, Mike Evans, like, so I can't just hitch my ride to touchdowns. I think I rather just invest in a cheaper Romeo Dobbs, who's still, I think, probably the favorite to lead the Packers in routes. So yeah, that's why I'm fading Watson. Just a lot of mouths to feed there.
D-Bro, we've got a dream team of Chris Welsh, Andrew Erickson, and Scott Pianowski waiting in the wings. So very quickly, Jayden Reed, why are you avoiding him?
It comes down to routes. I don't think he's going to be a full-time player. Raybon talked about 12 and 21 personnel, and you're looking at Jayden Reed last year, and Raybon talked about it, fading touchdowns. You're telling me the guy can't even surpass 60% of the snaps, and he scored the 5th most touchdowns amongst wide receivers last year? It's an easy fade for wide receiver 43 in expected fantasy points per game.